Hey, dear listener, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws with East Forest podcast. This week I have a conversation with Alexandre Tannous. Alexandre Tannous. It's like Alexander, but you say Alexandre. I try to get that right. It's not easy for my meaty West Coast American tongue. But he's a badass dude that I've known actually for a long time who has a lot of knowledge about sound and how it affects consciousness. He's a musician. He lives way on the upper tip of Manhattan, and he was one of the first people that I would get together with just to rap about sound and music and what we were each doing and kind of trade tips. And he definitely introduced me into a lot of cool stuff like song pods. Those are those little metal eggs that make these cool chime sounds, if you want to Google that. And also just a general idea of overtones and what the importance of those are in music when it really is shifting our consciousness and creating that overall effect. So this conversation definitely is a little deeper into some of that music stuff. Might be a little nerdy for some, but I really appreciate it, and I think a lot of people out there will too. So here it is, Alexandre Tannous. Alexandre, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Trevor. Happy to be here.
You're out there in New York in your same place?
Yes, the north tip of Manhattan.
You are, if I remember correctly, you are literally the most northern street in Manhattan.
Exactly.
Like on the corner.
Exactly that. This building is a northwest corner of Manhattan. I call it upstate Manhattan.
What's the name of the park across the street from you?
Inwood Hill Park.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you that the first video I ever shot for East Forest in 2009 was in that park and I was chopping wood?
Amazing. No.
Yeah, I had a song, or I have a song called Chopping the Woods. And I had a vision of chopping wood, but I lived in New York City and I thought maybe I could go up there and find some sort of log or tree on the ground and chop it. And so I bought an axe, I remember, and I took it on the A train, which kind of freaked people out. And I had at my time my girlfriend Karina, and she had a shitty video camera that we bought on eBay, and we went up there, and I remember I found a log, and she starts shooting, and I wanted it to be one take because in the song there's a chopping sound on the snare drum, and we did it, and the third take, I got it perfectly, but I remember I didn't know this at the time, but apparently there was some guy doing arbor side. He was like, then they were looking for this guy he was chopping trees down up there in that park. And so the cops showed up, and I saw the cop car, and I remember dropping the axe and just kind of like walking into the brush, into the bushes, and thankfully I got away with it. We got the shot. The video exists. I remember scaring a group of children. There was a school group that came up too, and they saw somebody chopping wood in New York City, and they didn't know. They couldn't compute what was happening. And the teacher's like, let's go this way. Let's go the other way. So I think very fondly of where you live. I have good memories of that park.
You X-Man?
Yeah.
Wonderful story.
But I also remember coming up because we had a mutual friend. I don't remember who it was who introduced us. It might have been Lewis or
Nick.
Was it Nick? Okay.
Yeah.
And he knew that you and I were both interested in sound and how sound shifts consciousness. And so you were generous enough to show me little experiential bits of what you're doing and what you're into. And we were kind of just riffing on that. And it was very exciting. I actually learned a few things from you that day that I still think about. We talked a lot about overtones, right?
Yeah.
And remember those song pods?
Yes.
I bought a pair. And
Great.
I've been using those for years, and people are always interested in what those are and where they can get them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like for those who don't know, which is probably everyone, they're very small eggs, and they're welded completely as one unit. And inside the egg, it creates these little tiny chimes that create very micro overtones and vibrations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a beautiful sound, but it's very small. So sometimes I'll use it live, and I'll just like put it next to the microphone
Uh-huh.
and sing into it at the same time. It's fun.
Clever. Yeah. Yeah, great instruments. Yeah. So, yeah, I do remember that day. We talked about so many things, and we can continue that conversation.
Yeah. Well, let's just back it up a little bit. There's some things I don't know about you, and I am a little curious how someone gets to be in a place such as yourself, another crazy person like me who's obsessed with sound and how sound can kind of take us places. I mean, I know you're a musician, right? Is that sort of the doorway in?
Yes. Most of my life has been in music, something I started learning when I was a kid, and I did 12 years of schooling at the university in music. Different aspects.
Where did you grow up?
In Beirut.
Oh.
And my parents immigrated here because of the war in '89, and been here since. I travel a lot because of field work, traveling and lecturing, facilitating, training people, doing research. But I'm based in New York City.
So what was your musical upbringing when you were a kid? Did you have one? Is it very regimented out there? Like when I think of European or say Russian or Asian, training with kids, it's pretty strict. A lot of levels and it's good training.
Mine was not that strict because the country was in a state of war, and so we were busy trying to survive.
Right.
We had priorities, you see.
Yes. You weren't singing and dancing your way through it.
We actually did that too. At the end you surrender. You just adapt. That's what human beings are, adaptable creatures.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what did you play? What were your instruments?
So I played various instruments, guitar, piano, singing, bass guitar. I loved a variety of different things, which is something that stayed with me throughout my life. I was so attracted to anything in music, whether music making, with different instruments, composing, analysis. Ended up by studying music theory and composition and various other things in music, music education, ethnomusicology, conducting. So I've always been interested in various facets of music. And that's what happens to anyone interested in music. They just need to be curious enough and willing to invest their time and energy and resources. And then you fall into the gravity of sound. That sound is what gives music its power, charm, and that's something I've been infatuated with all my life, and I keep on discovering new things.
Yeah. Do you know what's interesting about music and sound is that you could have a PhD in it or you could know not a damn thing, and we both respond to it emotionally the same way.
Absolutely.
There's a fundamental human quality to how we respond to music and sound, and it's got to go back to, well, okay, you could say in some ways it goes back to when we're in the womb and we hear the heartbeat, and our ears are the first things to develop as a fetus, and that's sort of the first sense that becomes what it means to be alive. But at the same time, you could take it all the way back to the Big Bang, to the Big Bang. God spoke. There was sound, so to speak. The story begins with sound. There was vibration. There was an outward energy. And this is like the continual reverberation that is all manifestation around us. I mean, how's that for some hippie shit?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not hippie, it's real. And it's
real. I know. Real, it's literal.
This is the truth that we arrive to in all book religions, texts, and Eastern philosophies. Sound is the creator of the universe. If sound really is the creator, then sound must be God. And that is something that is phrased in various ways. And for example, the New Testament in the Gospel of John, that first sentence, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the word here is reference to the concept of logos. Logos in ancient Greek means wholeness, completeness, and in Latin means ratio and reason appropriately, because sound is mathematical ratios, but it's the audible side of mathematics. That's what sound is in music, harmonies as well. So in Hinduism, you have that famous sentence, the universe was created with the primordial Om. And also in the Old Testament, the creation theory, or that first paragraph about creation, God, on the first day, God said, let there be light. God said. And people interpret it as God created the word in one thing at a time. I interpret it differently. He or she who knows how to create with words, then they will become gods.
Yes. You know what else is interesting about that? You know, with a lot of self-help and wellness information these days talks a lot about our thoughts and obviously our words and even just cognitive behavioral therapy, the way we think. We know it's very powerful, not just literally in how it creates our moods and our emotions and our feelings, but there seems to be something larger about that in our manifestation of the things we desire in our lives and what sort of happens, you know, the consequence, the karma that comes out of our words, that comes out of the sound that we create. And I'm sure you know that. We all know just in the way you speak to people and the way, if you ever, when you were a kid, did you ever, or you were an adolescent, you're growing up, there were people you admired and you might have noticed how they spoke.
Yes.
Like words they used or how they would speak.
Yeah.
And you would try to imitate it in a way.
Absolutely.
And then years later, you'd realize you actually had started to speak that way. And now it's how you speak and you don't even control it as much anymore. It became a part of who you are. It's the way you make the sounds out of this mouth thing that we have is a powerful way to define who you are, not just to the rest of the world, but to yourself.
Absolutely. This is a concept that I'm fascinated with, have been for a long, long time. How much the voice expresses so many things other than words. And that's something we're losing tremendously these days because of the extreme texting and emailing that we do. Well, when we do this, we're transmitting words, which do have content certainly, but we're not transmitting anymore the emotional packaging of what the words are about. This is something that can be transmitted through the inflections, through the fluctuating amplitude, the softness and loudness, and the tempo of the speech and how it changes at what point, what kind of meaning it would have, the stress on syllables and words, the way body language would align with the language that we are saying. Basically, what the voice is so important because this is the one thing that tells people what's going on inside of us, what kind of feelings we're experiencing, what kind of emotions, what kind of thoughts, what kind of intentions. So all of this now is missing. So we invent emojis to replace that. Well, I'm afraid that's not going to replace it efficiently. A smiley face, it's not going to describe that much. All of these subtle things that come out through how we sing the words. We sing words all the time, and different languages and the accents within certain region. Take, for example, the Californian accent versus the Southern accent and the East Coast accent. And if you go further to Vermont, then the accent changes. Even within New York City, you go to Long Island, the accent is so different from Brooklyn, and so on and so forth. All these micro variations, you're actually creating slightly different reality. And when you switch languages, the way you sing other languages, so these also affect reality to a certain extent that's immeasurable. But the way we sing words and language in general is so important. And we're losing this capacity to be able to communicate an emotional state. Emotions is something we're so interested in, and that's why we end up by imitating other adults, as you mentioned, because it's about, we're attracted to being in tune. Someone who is a good speaker, who has certain eloquence, that can be taken apart over many hours. What is eloquence? Being able to reach people, being able to change their emotional state. These are the traits of good speakers and people who do a lot of public speaking. And there's a way to do it. There's an understanding of not just linguistics, but also how to shift people's emotions, because at the end, that's what we look for.
Yeah.
And the speaker becomes more successful the more they're able to move people's emotions. I like to talk about the concept of logos, ethos, and pathos. Maybe we get to talk about it later, which is very fascinating in the structure of reality. This is what impacts people on all levels, and people are not always aware of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a big subject. Well, let me ask you this. So you do sound healing ceremonies, and
I call them sound meditation or sound therapy. I have reservation to certain terms that are circulating around sound healing and sound bath. And if you're interested, I can tell you why. But yes, that's what they call it, but it's not what I call it.
Yeah, I have a question about it, but tell me why. I mean, maybe it's a pejorative element to the word healing.
Yes, it's these days, because words such as healing and sacred are being used flippantly. Yes. I respect them so much, and that's why I don't use them in whatever chance, because I like to preserve them to just the right place. So here's why I don't favor sound healing, although that's mostly what people know of, or sound bath. Words create reality. That's the power of the word, and we can go so deep into the esoteric side of sound and how sound is God and so on and so forth. Maybe we get to talk about it later. But when we say sound healing, we're communicating something. That means healing is happening, but it's not telling the individual, the receiver, who's healing, how this healing is being done, what their role in the healing experience is. And it's deceptive. It's misinforming people. And that's something we're starting to do quite a lot these days, using words without really intending to use them, not being persnickety with how we use words and judicious. We end up by using words that can describe, oh, it's close enough. Like healers, for example, don't heal, they facilitate healing. They do a lot of very important things. But the real healer is the individual receiving.
Well, and the healing implies that you're broken. And it also
that too.
It implies a binary system of like you're either healed or broken. It's one or the other, as opposed to like the process of living.
Exactly. So you see all the baggage that it has. But let's limit it to just, what we mean by these things. So I call it sound meditation. It's not a term that I coined. It's very important. So I'm not promoting my own agenda. No, it's been used by others, and I promote people using things that mean really something. Sound therapy, harmonic therapy, sound meditation, harmonic meditation, something that includes the individual in the experience. And that's why I like the word sound meditation. That means meditation is happening, and clearly the active participant, or the participant whose role is active and not passive, no one is healing him or her. The sound is not healing her. Yes, sound can heal, but it heals by being used as a tool. The individual needs to use it as a tool to stop the discursive thinking, to create a feeling of presence, to distract themselves from being their own self, the monkey mind and all of that. So there is work being done, and this is how sound impacts people. But it doesn't only heal. It can create therapy, empowerment, nurturing, and rehabilitation, so on and so forth.
Let me ask a question on that point you made. So from your perspective, do you see the sound as sort of being an architecture that's creating the right space for the person to do what needs to be done, in essence, to do the healing? You're sort of setting the stage, giving it the proper nudges, as opposed to the sound being the scalpel, that's cutting the flesh. And if you understand what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, sure. Yes, it is a tool that we use. It's a surgical tool and very sophisticated, but it's not a magic wand.
Yes.
The person's not going to get the best out of it, the most out of it, if they are participating in a sound bath. Keep in mind that most practitioners sound practitioners. That's a better and more humble term than sound healers, given that they don't heal. So basically, if we call it sound bath, well, they're going to feel therapy, they're going to feel some well-being, maybe eventually fall asleep, because the mind, their thinking mind, is not being tamed in the process. They're not stilling their mind through the act of observation. And that's something that we find a lot of ancient musical cultures and mystical sects, such as Sufism. They use sound and music to transform themselves, to go into what they call a state of al-fana, total dissolution of the ego, losing the self. So through state of listening, judicious listening, where they go into a state of tarab. Tarab is emotional ecstasy, euphoria, enchantment, trance. And this is something we find also in Indian classical music, Turkish classical music, Arabic classical music, but also Byzantine chants, which are used in Greek Orthodox Church. So sound needs the individual to do work with, first and foremost, to listen, not just normal listening. There are various forms of hearing and listening. I'm talking here about intentional, attentional, judicious listening with a purpose. They're using it as a tool to stop the discursive thinking, to lose the self, to snap out of the unhealthy baseline, to disrupt the cognitive patterns, to pay attention to what sound's going to offer them, to go into the dimension of sound, to observe the overtones, the ethos and pathos, how their emotions are being evoked because of this active listening to music, raga especially, and other musical styles and cultures that are constructed in a way, these modes, which are like scales, but the ultimate point is to shift emotional state, are constructed in a way where they combine different frequencies that create mathematical ratios. The ratio is between the two notes in the interval. For example, the fifth, C to G or D to A, is a 3-to-2 ratio. All that we hear in music is perfect ratios, but now we don't follow the pure ratios because we create music based on equal temperament, and that's another
before
story.
We get into that,
we get to that into later. Yes, I know.
But to stay on this topic about
I will.
Of sound. So would you say that essentially it's a form of meditation, a meditative tool, and a way of dissolving the activity of the mind to get to these deeper layers? Yes. The work that you do in your sound meditations, I don't know how it's evolved, but do you still primarily work with non-melodic instruments such as, say, meaning like in a raga or something that has a lot of melody happening, and are you still working with bowls and different things that work primarily with overtones?
Yes, I use both actually. Predominantly these overtone emitting instruments, which are not melody instruments, what they do, they transmit the harmonic series, these fine notes that people hear when someone plays singing bowl around them, or didgeridoo, gong, disc bell, or even shruti box or harmonium. These harmonics allow the individual to feel the original harmony, where the word harmony came from, this immensely intelligent harmonic series, which is one of the most sophisticated manifestation of intelligence in nature, and intelligence always manifests in mathematical systems. Fractal geometry, Fibonacci series, golden mean, and harmonic series are some of them. And so basically I use these instruments, but sometimes I use instruments that do have notes where I can create melodies. But I prefer when the notes also emit overtones. So I work with different aspects of sound, but I try to stay as close to the raw harmony that's not quantized, that's not adjusted, that's not tamed, castrated.
I mean, all notes have overtones. You like the ones that have the most
audible,
the most audible. They're right there. Like a Tibetan bowl is really an obvious. A gong's a very obvious example of that. Mm-hmm. And I think for those who don't know what overtones are, it's sort of. Why don't you give a quick definition of that and what we're hearing? It's sort of that thickness, the layers, the octaves of sound.
Mm-hmm. I can give an example so that people get an idea. I can give an example with my voice. So, yes, as you said, Trevor, overtones are everywhere. Their role is to give us the tone color or timbre, which is a unique harmony. It's we all have different harmonies, and people experience our harmony through our voices. You experience the instrument's harmony when you compare a note played on a flute versus a note played on a viola or an oboe, which would allow the individual to distinguish one instrument from another given a tone color. But in most cases, the fundamental frequency, the most pronounced part of the sound, is so loud, has high amplitude, it overshadows these overtones. Mm-hmm. So they seem as if they don't exist, where in fact, if we do harmonic spectrum analysis using specific software, we can see the overtones being there and we can even play them. But when we play gongs and bowls and didgeridoos, and these are instruments that human beings everywhere in the world have been infatuated with, and they go to great lengths to construct them whenever they work and use them whenever they doing any form of sound therapy. I'm deeply interested in this intuitive intelligence that humans everywhere in the world would make them be drawn to use these instruments. Why? Because the ultimate point is to wake up the person, allow them to snap back into their healthy baseline, into grid, going back into themselves. This is probably the best way to say it in the shortest amount of words, to shift the noise to signal ratio, quieting the mind. And that's what they do. They remind us of something really important. They create stillness. Anyone who has witnessed a singing bowl or gong, even for 10, 20 seconds, and I can demonstrate that later, they feel the inner peace, the timelessness, the grounding. It's magical how it impacts us, and there are reasons why they impact us in such a way. But I'm going to sing one note in a normal way, and then I'll sing it in another way to bring out the overtones so that people listening can understand what these overtones are. So this is a normal way of producing the voice, singing a note. Let's say, ah. Now, if I want people to hear the overtones in my voice, I have to sing the note differently by creating a different conditions, acoustical conditions. I need to change what's happening in my buccal cavity, that is the space in my mouth and the upper part of the throat, to be able to make it bigger and smaller to allow a natural amplification of one of these overtones in my voice so that people can hear it, along with listening to the fundamental frequency. And this would sound like this.
So this is getting into like Tibetan throat singing territory.
It's similar to it, exactly.
And two tones at once kind of idea, or three.
Right.
Yeah.
And they do it, but in a more guttural way. There are many different ways of doing it, but there's a reason why they're doing that, because it takes them very deeply into deep transcendental, introspective, deeply meditative state, contemplative state. So yeah, the best way to work with sound is through meditation or meditative state, contemplative state, or state of mindfulness, to learn from what sound wants to communicate to them, to experience themselves differently, to learn about the observer, to learn about who am I. So that's why, and by the way, what I did is what Aum is about. It's not the word, it's not Om, it's Aum, but it's not all, the word itself. It's what it stands
vowels?
For.
Yeah,
it's all
we're
vowels.
Moving through all the shapes we can make with our mouth and creating sound. So it's sort of like all sound in a way.
Exactly, and that's what I was doing to bring out these overtones. I was shifting between all the vowels and the shades between the vowels. We don't have in English all the vowels that are contained. There are many different vowels other than the 5 vowels that we know. So this is basically what happens when you pronounce vowels. Your buccal cavity is of a different size. This is to overtone singing. You have to create what's called in physics Helmholtz resonance. Natural amplification of one frequency. And that's what we do. That's what language is about. And even the consonants. Consonants are vowels with a certain interruption and interaction with the tongue, the lips, the teeth, the uvula, the soft palate, like a D sound, D. If people can say D and feel what they're doing, there's the tongue touching the upper teeth in the back, and you're closing your jaw and then open it slightly, D or an L sound, or an R sound, or uvular R, like in French and German, or sound, your soft palate. So basically, you are releasing different packets of overtones of specific shape, and that creates reality. It's far out.
This is getting pretty deep. I keep having these things I want to ask you about. So let me ask you this. Now, I mean, most of these instruments you're speaking of that you're the most fond of are metallic, right? So
yes.
Before, and how this has a history with humanity. So before, say, the Bronze Age, then primarily our way of connecting to this would be, I would assume, through drumming, through rhythm.
Yes. And drum heads have overtones as well.
Of course, it has tone. But let's talk about rhythm for a bit, and if we want to go even further back in time, and the role of that being music and sound, and an element of music and sound, and how I think a hot sort of word in that sound meditation, sound healing word is about brain entrainment, binaural beats, these sorts of things. How do you incorporate rhythm, beat, drum, the idea, and how would you use that intentionally in your own work?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, first of all, it's important to mention that it's all about mathematics at the end, whether you're dealing with melody or rhythms. So rhythms also amount to mathematical ratios at the end, to numbers. For example, there's something called 3-2, something that musicians, especially percussionists, deal with. That is, when you're tapping with one hand, 3 beats per cycle, like this, for example, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the second hand, let's say, is going to tap 2 in that space. So 1, 2, 1, 2. So
it's not so easy to do if you've never done that before.
Right, exactly. So playing them together would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 1, 2. If you speed this so fast to a level where the sound becomes continuous, you need software to do that, then it becomes a perfect fifth. What's a perfect fifth or fifth? For the non-musicians, that is the distance between C and G, or DNA. C and G is a fifth because it's C, D, E, F, G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That interval is a 3-2 ratio. When you speed up 3-2, also becomes 3-2 ratio, which is fifth. You start to hear pure fifth by speeding up the 3-2. And this is why all cultures have melodic mode and rhythmic modes, or ancient cultures, I should say. So having known this, I use rhythm in a very specific way because I want to create an experience where people are lying down, losing themselves as much as possible, stopping the discursive thinking, going to a hypnagogic state, which is a state that exists between wakefulness and sleep. I want the brain to be awake, but the body asleep, just to go into state of pure being. No thinking, not doing anything, because we're really human doings. We're doing things all the time. I want complete restoration and allowance for the self-healing to happen. That's what sound is about. It's allowing for the individual to heal themselves and to be entrained by the sound. But also emotionally, mentally, they can further this by listening closely and listen and learn through the active listening, because it's about upgrading the operating system through observation, since we cannot start from hard drive or CD. That's what eventually enlightenment becomes, is the individual learning by observing the mind, observing how they're creating reality, their mind, feelings, and emotions. So I don't use rhythms in my playing. Nothing groovy, that is. Nothing against that. No, rhythms can create meditative state, but I don't want people to dance here because people do this all the time. I'm trying to offer them a different experience where they can lose themselves. I don't want to entrain them in a way where the body starts to move in entrainment with the music. If I'm playing groovy rhythms on drums, for example, if I use drums, which I do sometimes, I use a very steady beat that is
yeah, it's sort of like the old shaman,
exactly,
the straight rattle or the straight Lakota beat style thing.
Precisely.
It gets to kind of create its own trance by
yes.
repetition and not getting into a groove in a sense.
Not getting into groove. That's how I like to use it, because these will amount, whether the individual is using shaker or rattle, these are overtones, and many different things happening at the same time. They cause a wire out to consciousness if the person is listening attentively, and that's how people go in trance. Similarly, when a drum is being used, any sort of drum, the steady beat and the overtones that come out from the skin, especially if animal skin is being used on drum and not synthetic skin, because it has different tone color. So that's how I use them. But if I'm playing, let's say, some of my xylophone-like instruments, which are melodic notes and they do have overtones, I do include some rhythms, but in a free way. I put these rhythms into the surface of the emotionality and how much the melodic structure that I'm extemporizing is allowing them to drift into a state of contemplation, into a state of introspection, to a point where they become the sound. I want them to become the sound. See, art wants to change people. Art wants to change us, wants to give us a great experience that can communicate something to us. But we lost, pretty much, quite a lot from what art should do, and became a commodity and means to, invest. This is not terribly bad, but we need to give attention to people. We need to focus on offering people a therapeutic experience, an empowering experience, a healing experience, but we need to engage them in the experience. So that's why understanding how sound works and not talking about something that's not really happening. And that's my point in sound bath. Sound bath, assuming that, okay, well, people come here, I don't talk to them, I just start playing, and they're going to lie down and something is going to happen. How about if we tell them how to listen, what sound is really about, how to better use sound?
What does it mean for someone to listen? I mean, how do you think it's, or what
People
can someone
interpret
do?
differently. People interpret differently. Look, for example, how we listen to music. Pop music is music composed to people who don't know how to really listen and understand music. This is not historically how music has been used. I'm not saying it's bad, let's not do it anymore. No, this comes at a cost. There are consequences. Well, we're not paying attention anymore. Because we're so busy, we're having to resort to listening to music while doing other things. Well, you can't do that when listening to free jazz. Why? Because it's going to demand your attention. Because free jazz is about that. Is that you're not leaving you room to think, but you need to do something very hard to pay attention to all of these instruments. If you're playing, you need to allow yourself to be influenced by everyone else improvising at the same time, and be influenced by them, and you are influencing them. So the more you have music where there are many different things happening simultaneously, some sort of counterpoint, and the person is engaged in the act of listening. This goes even to Bach. When you listen to Baroque music that has counterpoint, polyphonic music or polyrhythmic music, and you're listening to all of the parts, there is no room for discursive thought. There is no room even for contemplation. You are there. So when that happens, the sound is doing quite a lot of amazing things.
So it's about attention for you, which is a concentrative muscle. So perhaps even just a basic meditation practice of being used to focusing on one thing, you would say maybe could open up music in a deeper way for people.
Yeah.
It's funny because, I've always thought that all music is, let's call it sound healings, whatever you want to call it. It's sound, it's music. It's just how much intention is being brought to that. Mm-hmm. And the pervasiveness of this around the planet. I mean, good God, it's like, look how popular music and sound is in our lives. Beyond the fact that we use it just to talk and communicate and figure out, feeling the resonance right now when I'm speaking. I'm feeling the resonance in my bones, in my skull, in my ears of my own voice. And that I'm so used to that, it defines what it means to be alive for me.
Absolutely.
And music is everywhere. I mean, look at today. I don't think music is probably at its zenith of all of human history right now, of popularity and pervasiveness. Spotify, YouTube, it's in our cars, it's on our phones, it comes out of Alexa and our little home thing. It's everywhere. And even right now we're doing this podcast, which is an audio thing, which I prefer. It's sort of an old medium, old in technological terms, but I like that it's just sound. You're just sitting there listening. Your imagination can make your own picture. You can concentrate more on like the conversation and feel a part of it when it's just that one element, the sound.
Mm-hmm. And the brain is not having to sort through the visual data if people were watching a video while listening. So we want to focus on the auditory aspect, because that's what changes people's reality in an imaginative way. Leave them a place to play, leave them a place to interact, and not give them everything. And that's something that Hollywood took advantage of, in creating different realities for people through films. But that's another story. Let's not go there. So, but going back to this aspect of what sound wants to do, what I'm promoting is not that don't listen to pop music, it's bad for you. No. Just know the consequences. Know what you get from making certain choices. People have the right to know. And it's our ignorance that got us in this difficult place. And no matter what we try, even all the hard work that has been done, things keep on getting messed up. So if something is wrong, we need to create a change. For us to create the right change, to save ourselves, each other, and the planet, we need to understand more. And sound, given that it's such a powerful medium, it's the most popular art for many good reasons. We can talk about them for days. But there's a reason why music and sound were used in shamanic ceremonies, all of them, in indigenous ceremonies, in
all of them.
All spiritual ceremonies, religious graduations, everywhere. Nothing happens without sound. If we understand what sound can do, and to what extent it can go with this influence, we can use it as the most powerful tool.
Well, you're kind of touching on a subject that I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on, but I do want to talk about because there's a lot of misinformation out there about it.
Disinformation.
I think you know what I'm going to talk about, and it's this idea of what you could 532, 432, Solfeggio, the Nazis, et cetera. And I don't think we need to have like some kind of definitive discourse on that, but I'm under the position, shall we say, that I've played around with these different tunings. It might have been you that recommended a great book, The History of Equal Temperament. Was that you? That's a great book for anyone who has a little bit of a music background and wants to figure out like just some basic historical data on how we got to A being 440 today, or that's not even really just how most Western music is in that tuning. But I'm a piano player, and so I'm a little bit stuck a lot of times. It's like that book taught me that equal temperament came about largely because of the piano. It's sort of we wanted to play in 12 keys, and then orchestras, everyone had to kind of succumb to the piano so we could all be in tune together. And I've tried different things, and I've enjoyed experimenting to be outside the box of 440, but at the end of the day, the emotional quality is still there. I do agree that like a perfect fifth is a perfect fifth is a perfect fifth, whatever tuning that's in. And that's why the human voice or instruments like string quartets that do the tunings just with their finger and they're just using their ear, we hear these sorts of beautiful natural harmonics all the time. It's not like we're stuck in this system that's trying to like bring us down. I think it's much more fluid than we make it out to be. If anything, the most strict thing is probably what I play, piano. Like I hit a note, it plays the note. Not side note, there was an interesting modern piece I heard recently that was released in two versions, in equal temperament and just intonation, a piano piece. And to our ear, when we hear the just intonation, it sounds out of tune.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into this a little bit. What are your feelings on do you think much about this when you're creating music?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Just to riff a little bit on the 440 versus 432 without stretching for too long, this is about, where should we start the tuning on A being 440 cycles per second, that's hertz, or 432 cycles per second.
Well, let's just, before you start, remind everyone that sound in tone is infinite.
Yes.
This is like our spectrum of what we can hear, and we could start these things anywhere we like. This is just sort of like a nice spot for the human ear that we've decided on.
Exactly. And we hear between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz, give or take. That's the average. And so basically, we don't know if 432 is the better one than 440. People have to understand that this tuning frequency has been changing throughout the centuries,
Yes.
going up and down. So people should not think that the ancients knew about 432 and that's what they tuned. How would they measure it, for God's sake? There was no electricity, So they do it intuitively, but they were searching. They kept on going up and down. For example, if you want to play Bach and record it in an authentic way, if you have an orchestra that follows performance practice, then you would record it at 415 hertz. If you want to record Giuseppe Verdi, then you record 435. It's not really
European orchestras, aren't a lot of them a little higher?
Oh, yeah, they're a little higher. Yes, exactly. Now 440 is used, but not everyone is using that. So there is still no agreement, but certainly the Nazis did not change that. But the point is that this is not the most important thing. Even if we arrive to a conclusion and 432 will be the better one than 440, what is more important than no one is talking about, which makes me think that this popularity of 440 versus 432 is disinformation, is getting people busy researching and talking about something that's not nearly as relevant as equal temperament or non-equal temperament. And that is basically how have you divide the octave into 12 semitones that are equidistant, quantized, that's equal tempered half steps, where each half step becomes equal to 100 cents. A cent is a unit used for logarithmic measurement, and the entire octave is 1200 cents. Or in the natural tuning, and there are many different tunings: Pythagorean tuning, mean tuning,
yes, but what you're saying, I think, is like the main difference is how natural and accurate are those ratios versus not.
Right.
And, is it a pure 3-to-2 ratio, for instance, for a fifth, or is it slightly off? And it's slightly off essentially because they're trying to fit all the keys in, essentially, so you can play different keys at once. And so it was a compromise. And in that compromise, we've gotten very used to hearing that in our Western ears. And I think the point you're trying to make is that that's a more powerful difference in the effectiveness of that sound than where that tuning starts from. Meaning, like, if your guitar is tuned down or up is less probably important than the ratio of all those different intervals that you're playing. Am I hearing you correct on that? Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. That's just that's just sort of like if something's it's like, is that harmony truly in tune or is it more out of tune? And if it creates a mathematical shape, let's say some sort of geometrical shape, it's just more. It's more like cymatics. It's more beautiful. It's more perfect. It's more clean. It's more simple. It's more just a straight resonance. Line. Yes.
Yes, exactly that. And this is not something that's possible. It's not possible to play in non-equal temperament on a guitar because you have the divisions, the frets. Every time you have separation, whether the separation is in frets, like on guitars, lutes, or bass guitars, or divisions on the piano, or keyboard instruments, harpsichords and organs, or xylophone, and
you can't change it.
You can't change. What I like to pay attention to is what human beings do naturally. And I'm a string player. I play double bass. That was my primary instrument. I play other instruments. But all string players, if you give them the option when they play fretless instruments, non-fretted instruments, like violins, violas, cellos, and basses, they play in non-equal temperament. And we have to adjust when we're playing with a guitarist or a piano player because they cannot play the way they want to. So I'm interested in this intelligence and human intuition, what it takes us to. So we always sing in non-equal temperament, play brass and wind instruments because you can overblow, underblow a little bit the notes on.
Or like those who have a good ear, right?
Right, exactly. Why?
But you're saying naturally we do this. Yeah,
without thinking about it.
Yeah, our bodies know what a harmony is, and that's why it's probably one of the reasons why harmony is so satisfying to hear, so satisfying to sing, such a pleasing thing to. Even when you're doing that throat singing, essentially you're feeling the pleasure of harmony.
Absolutely, it's natural harmony. It's the
harmony in the mouth.
Exactly. This is such a powerful system that has been called the living God. When people dig deep into the esoteric side of sound and the connection between sound and religions, all religions, what they're communicating, basically, the inspiration is from the physics of sound. The sacred space, the temples, the churches, all holy places, old or new and contemporary religions, people don't realize how much it's all about sound, the primordial Om that created the universe, the logos, the word, the song in ancient Egypt. And it's this what we want to understand. So for me, I would choose to stay close to nature. And that's something that it's important to address these days, how throughout the centuries, we have been drifting further and further away from nature. Something is causing us to make all the decisions to separate ourselves from our heart, from each other and nature, whether it's about GMO, and by the way, equal temperaments, kind of, you can describe it a little bit as the GMO of sound, eliminating things that nature gave us that we don't need because they're not practical. Basically, the only detriment of equal temperament is that if you tune a piano to equal tempered tuning, you're limited with how much you can transpose a piece of music from one key to another key. You can only go to neighboring keys.
Or are you trying to say if you were to tune it in just intonation?
In just intonation, you can only go from C major to
right. You're limited.
Keys, limited to 4 sharps or 4 flats in key signature, which are called neighboring keys. If you go beyond these, the piece of music will start to sound out of tune. Why? Because you change the mathematics of the octave and the steps, half steps and whole steps. So that's the only thing that we lost. And the equal temperament gave us the advantage of tuning the piano into equal temperament and be able to transpose piece of music from one key to any other key. And Bach was enthralled by this idea, and this is how he wrote. This is why he wrote the 2 books of the well-tempered clavier, fugues and preludes in every major minor key. He did that twice.
It was new technology back then.
New technology, but he didn't know what consequence it can. You see now, as you said earlier, we hear non-equal temperament, a piece of music played on non-equal temperament as being out of tune. That's because we are out of tune. And that's why we need to be very creative in addressing these things, because we're out of tune on so many levels. We are killing nature. We're killing each other, or we're succumbing to the act of killing each other by being pushed on being infatuated by our religion, and we're killing each other over whose God is more loving and whose God is more merciful, where all of these religions follow the same God, Jehovah. This is something that we've been doing. We've been so self-annihilating and self-destructive. Now, the ancients talk about a virus to consciousness. The Gnostic called it the archons. The Native Americans called it Wetiko. Native Hawaiian Indians called it the Ipe. Whether there's a virus or not, because it sounds so far out, well, if we observe what we're doing to ourselves, each other in the world, and how heartless we're becoming, how much we're valuing money over consciousness, profit over consciousness, how much we push to make wars because wars are profitable and they give certain advantages and hegemony. This is something that we need to address. And what we do with powerful practices, spirituality, shamanism, and how bastardized they become so quickly when we're not attentive. We really need to understand the human condition, that no one's going to come and save us. We need to be very creative and very attentive to figure out how can we bring our intuition and imagination, the 2 most powerful things we have born within us. And to go beyond the indoctrinated mind, which is education, really. Any form of education is indoctrination. That's what matriarchal society is about. Understanding harmony, understanding the value of living in nature, and understanding how the mind of Gaia works, how these mathematical systems that are being used against people now from brain-only people. Because we can create a different reality, less resonant reality, when certain parts of the body are being used. It all comes down to this. Is the person being in tune or not? Self-tuning is very important. So when we use only the brain, we're going to create a reality where we promote AI and artificial intelligence and virtual reality, enhanced reality, augmented reality, and probably even cryptocurrencies and being dehumanized, Yeah,
that's a lot of good points there. So actually, let me do something for you, Alexandre. Let's let me do a little rapid fire round because we only have a certain amount of time left, and I have a few things I want to hear, and you just touched on a couple of them. So
Okay.
I'll try to keep it on course here. But
It's very hard to do that when talking about sound,
you're a
right?
passionate man. Speaking of AI and virtual reality, one of the things, I mean, all in all, these technological changes, cultural changes, the march of history, it's a double-edged sword. It's the path
Yes.
that is humanity. And as we get these tools, we can do such beautiful things. And then, of course, with a hammer, you can kill someone or you can build a house. And
Yes.
we're sort of doing it all at once. It's like a blitzkrieg of our unconscious. And when I think about virtual reality, I think about the advent of 360 sound or 3D sound, which I tend to believe, as we went from mono music to stereo music, the next will be our headphones and so forth will essentially be giving us a sensation of sound from every direction, and we can mix in this way. And it probably will just be the way it becomes. And this, again, is a tool. I mean, imagine how you can shift someone's consciousness when you can control the sound that dramatically, and you can control every bit of light coming into their eye however you like. I would imagine you could do something quite powerfully, quite quickly.
Yeah.
So what are your feelings on AI and these experiments of AI making music? How might this change the role of humans making music? Do you think it would be effective? Do you think it's bullshit? Do you think it's scary? Do you think it's cool? Do you think it will never work?
I think it's all of them together. But when we're inattentive, the negative is going to win because that's the running trend so far. When we're distracted, when we're busy with consumerism and busy with awful news and media and all of these things, the chaos, the noise, the static, we don't make the best choices. This is one thing we need to learn so well. There's a value to the presence of the mind. Yeah.
A friend who works at Google X, and when he was being interviewed, the interview was 8 months long. And one of the questions was, if you're working on developing AI with us, which is the program they're sort of working on, what do you think we should be working on? And he said, I think we need to figure out how to teach the AI how to love. And they're like, where did you come up with that? And he says, actually, it came to me in an ayahuasca ceremony last weekend, and instead of saying they hired him, so I have to hand it to.
Fantastic.
There are people out there who are concerned about this. It's like, what does that even mean? How do we do this? There's a conscientiousness and a concern on the people building these things, but then there's an overall momentum that seems unstoppable that no one's in control of. This is. What's the Marshall McLuhan line that humans are the sex organs of machines?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
It's just happening. And no one's really in charge, but we're all a little bit worried about what is happening.
Right. So my thinking aligns with what Rudolf Steiner talked about, that there's going to be technology, is going to be major in human world, but we need to make sure that we're creating technology that will serve human and not jeopardize the human existence. This has been the number one concern, even with people interested in AI. There's a wonderful film called Technocalypse that came out in 2006 or 2007, 3-part documentary about technology and the future of technology and artificial intelligence, so on. So that's not something we've been paying attention to really create technology that humans can control them, can use them to benefit humans and the environment, and not to be at risk. I'm afraid we are not paying close attention to that because
it's hard. Yeah, because it's complex to define what's harmful, and then you've got all these interests who don't want you to know what is harmful and all these sorts of things. It's not easy to know.
Exactly. It's not easy to know, and there's something that we need to know, and we don't know that's there to be known. We need to know that. We need to make effort. We need to conceive the inconceivable. We need to take into account these things. But the people who are making these decisions need to be also working from the heart and not just the brain. And that's the number one problem in the world. is that we are not creating reality based on the presence of the heart. The real alchemy, which people don't know what it is, it's not about transforming heavy metal to gold. This is just a ridiculous thing to ward people off of alchemy. The real alchemy is when we unite the sun and the moon, which is the brain and the heart, the sun and the moon, the masculine and feminine, and the individual becomes the philosopher's stone while doing this work over an entire lifetime. That's the real alchemy. Then you're creating a reality based on resonance, based on using all the hardware in the body. Anything short of that is going to become, the individual may become heartless, very smart person, but heartless, incompassionate, maybe even a psychopath or sociopath. What creates sociopath or psychopath? Well, that's a person who has suffered tremendously from some trauma, suffering, and has been left unaddressed, and they start committing act, and little by little they stop ignoring their conscious, that voice within them telling them that's not good, don't do this to someone else, this remorse, and they go against it little by little. Eventually they become serial killer and dictators and whatnot. But these are people suffering just like all addicts.
Well, maybe, your work and what you're talking about, this idea of like clearing the mind and centering yourself and using sound in that way, in that intentional, focused way, is a way of strengthening that heart voice. It's a way of finding what that inner wisdom is, learning to trust it, learning to strengthen it, and ultimately connecting that with our mind space.
That's why I do this work, but I need to understand it further, and that's why I don't just limit my practice to where it is. There's so much to know about sound, and the practice would change as we know more, but so it's the same for the individual receiving. We should stop thinking that we can go around and healing people. It does not work like that. This is called ego inflation, and that's something that needs to be addressed, that there are pitfalls. Anytime we're working with powerful tools, powerful methods such as psychedelics and shamanism or breath work or dieting or other plants and sound and yoga and meditation, all these things, because they're so powerful, people need to learn how to handle energy and power, and that's what people need to learn.
Well, we don't have a lot of elders for that these days.
No,
I mean, unfortunately, our entire self-help movement is focused around money and narcissism.
Exactly.
And so
exactly.
It's not based around what it's really trying to promote. I mean, all we can say to people is like there are a lot of charlatans out there. And it's just the more you connect with your own inner heart wisdom, the more you're going to have that discernment about just what's right for you and like what's going to like actually help. You know what I mean?
Yes. It's and that's the most important thing, is to do something positive toward ourselves, others, and nature. But we need to let go of these impulses, following impulses. Impulses are non-discerning actions. We're acting more and more from the reptilian brain. And that is all based on me, self-preservation, fight or flight, keeping the machine alive. We need to realize when we're distracted what we can generate and at what consequences. We need to be more judicious, attentive. We need to know more than what we know. We need to realize that that person who calls himself a healer, even if he or she has good intention, their altruism can become pathological, and they can disempower someone else at the cost of wanting to help them. So instead of empowering people and make them realize that you heal yourself, what I'm doing here as a healing facilitator will give you the condition, will give you situation, I'll give you method, I'll create specific setting for you to exercise that, I'll guide you in the process, but I'm not the one going to heal you. Yeah. We are our own gurus. There are things that people need to address and know about, such as ego inflation, spiritual materialism, spiritual bypassing, and narcissistic spirituality and spiritual narcissism, and pathological altruism, and something I call monobibliosis, which is the disease of becoming an expert after having read one book. That's human tendency, or becoming an expert after having had one experience.
Well, how about after watching a few YouTube videos?
That too. Why? We need to understand why this happens, because people are disempowered. People are passionate. They want to help others and themselves. But when they're disempowered and they don't know enough, they start to capitalize on just about anything. The ego wants to use a crutch. Anything really can be used as a crutch. The more powerful it is, the better crutch it is. Well, people need to understand these things.
Yes. And one step at a time, right? And I think at the end of the day, there are many, many millions and millions of people, I think both of us included, who they want to do better. They want to lead a meaningful life, and they're doing the best they know how to do. There's just a lot of information out there. And
Yes.
hopefully, for those who are hearing this, there's something in there, some nugget that will take them to the next step in their journey.
And to be inspired to work harder and not to stop on the first step and say, I'm a healer, I'm a master. That's my whole point.
A
It's
little
not a
humbleness
criticism.
takes you a long way. Yeah, for
Yes,
sure.
is humility, is self-maintenance, and watching the self from the ego inflation, because that's not something that others can do to us. Why? Because we're going to play the narcissistic injury. We're going to play offended, and that's what we can do. We do this all the time. We are the most effective obstacles to ourselves until we start to work on healing and realize that we create problems to spend time and energy in fixing them. That becomes a huge part of life.
Well, maybe a lot of healing comes from not knowing, and from the place of starting saying, I don't know everything, and I'm not going to know everything. And you take things in the formless. You take things that you simply feel.
I agree with you. There's a beautiful thing about not knowing, but not when there is someone else waiting to misinform that person and hijack their consciousness and feed them with another reality and belief, because reality springs out of belief.
Well, I think Lao Tzu said it best, is those who speak the truth don't know the truth because the truth can't be spoken.
Exactly. You just have to be there. That's the power of the direct experience. But you need to know how to observe, how to quiet your mind, how to spot the truth, how to deal with cognitive dissonance. This is real work. That's why Gurdjieff called it the work with capital letters.
Well, you have to live on the edges like you on the last street in Manhattan by the river in the park. Well, I think we could talk, there's many more things we could talk about, and maybe you'd be happy we could do this again in the future and dig into some of these other subjects and get into the weeds if we like. Mm-hmm. But before we do go, how can folks connect with you, and if they want to learn more, what's the word?
Soundmeditation.com is my website. I have a lot of great content, and I keep looking for more time to post more content. It's vetted stuff, it's real stuff, there's no BS. I don't sell anything on it. I do have some recordings, 6 recordings actually, that I did 2 years ago. I've not finished the art yet and put them out there, but people can buy them directly from me if they're interested. They're sounds for meditation and using very advanced technology to capture these overtones that are very hard to record. Or to connect to me on Facebook. I use it in a attentive way. I post relevant things now.
What's your name on Facebook?
Alexandre Tannous.
Tannous?
Correct.
Yeah, of course there'll be links to this, but that's great. And you also do some experiential stuff. I know you do mostly all over, but you definitely do some in New York City, right?
Yes, here and there. I travel a lot to facilitate and teach and do research, but I give few public experiences a year, public ones, and I also work with private clients and I teach the practice.
Wonderful.
There's a lot that I'm involved with, and but I continue the research going, and I'm writing a book, and I train others. So I keep a counterpoint of different things happening, because we need this work to be out there to wake ourselves up with hard work.
Well, here's one more brick in the wall, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your beautiful work, Trevor. It's something that I recommended to a lot of people, and you've created amazing field and transportive transporting journey. It is a journey. That's again, that the journey is what's healing when the person is aware of what's happening, who is doing the work, and greater and greater level of self-awareness. And music always did that, but while involving the individual.
Well, we're all doing the work together.
Yes.
Thanks, brother. There you go. That was the deep dive. That's our sound dive. Thank you, Alexandre, for coming on. Please check out eastforest.org/tour. I've got a lot of dates in and around, and I'd so love to see people there. It really helps me keep going energetically. Please do review this podcast. If you just scroll down on your phone, somewhere down there at the bottom of like the actual podcast somewhere, there's an opportunity to add your little 5 stars, which helps a lot. And you can just take a second, type in a little anything. I read those little messages, those little reviews, and they really help in just sort of the rankings and for the podcast to get noticed, and for people to who find it to just decide to check it out. So just trying to spread the good word. Appreciate it. info@eastforest.org is also the way you can ask any questions or just say hi, and if there's something relevant there, I'll totally read it on the air. The song you hear in the background is called Bardos, and it's from Music to Die To, if you want to check that out. That was a live track from a ceremony where I was playing a harmonium and singing with a lot of delay. It's kind of a deep dive. So keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do, you gotta do it with grace, folks. Do it with grace.